I actually have a background in psychology and computer science, so I think of myself in really living in these two different worlds. One is the messy world of human behavior, desires, preferences, motivations, and needs, combined with this somewhat more cold and structured world of math, equations, and most recently, AI. And what excites me the most about this intersection is that we can really try to leverage the data that we generate pretty much every single day, combined with tools like machine learning, AI, to both understand, predict, and change human behavior and human psychology. And kind of that is like pretty broadly construed, ranging anywhere from people's personality, their personal values, their mental health, really getting a sense of who is the person behind the data that is generated. And when I started this research, well, more than 10 years ago now, I did it in what I would call the old school world of machine learning. So the world where you train a model for a very specific task. I could tell it, I could teach it to take your credit card spending and predict whether you're more extroverted or introverted. And what we know, and then we just have it run through a lot of trial and error rounds. Right? Over time, it understands how to associate the input with the output. And what we've learned is that machines are extremely good at solving these tasks, right? They're really good at recognizing patterns in vast amounts of data, but it was very limited in terms of the opportunities when it comes to applications. And that's just because the models that we used to train, they were, first of all, dependent on you having a data set that combines psychology with, let's say, digital footprints, credit card spending, social media data, browsing histories. And they were also very limited in what they could do. So if I had trained a model to predict your extroversion from credit card spending, my model might have turned out great. But the moment that I want to predict something else, right, the moment that I want to predict whether you might be neurotic or impulsive, or I have a different data source instead of credit card spending, I now have access to your social media, that model was entirely useless because it's never been trained to solve that task. Now, fast forward to the introduction of what I would call the new world of AI, the new world of machine learning, in the form of these transformer models. And you probably know them in the context of large language models, the likes of ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and so on. And when you think about them, at the core, they were trained for a very, very basic, simple task. Right? They were trained to predict the most likely next word in a sentence. It doesn't get much simpler than that. And yet, what I'm hoping to convince you is that they can do so much more than just generate text and model language. So it's almost like a misnomer to call them language models, because when we think of language, we think of modeling grammar, maybe semantics. But what I will show you is that really give us an edge when it comes to understanding psychology, predicting, and potentially also changing behavior. And I want to start with these very simple examples that give you some intuitions of what I mean by this. If I give ChatGPT a sentence like, I left Seattle, and after about 3 hours of driving north, I crossed the border with, now this is the interactive part that you've all been dreading all day long. There's not going to be any cold calling in this one. You're going to cross the border with Canada. Right? But for the model to actually put this word there, it needs to simulate something about our physical space, right? Because our narratives, the data that these models are trained on, they contain information of how we think about the physical space. These models also learn how to model and simulate physical space. Now, you can take it a step further and say, well, American restaurants are known for their, could be anything, burgers, fries, you name it. But for the model, again, to put that word there, it needs to use liberally, understand, know something about society, know something about culture, but it needs to know that, well, American restaurants serve food that's different to German restaurants, Asian restaurants, and so on and so forth. You can take it a step further, and this is where my interests lie, is if you give it a sentence like, Sam hates oats, but he's still forced to eat some, he probably feels disgusted, right? Because I make him eat something that he doesn't like. So this is telling you something about a psychological process. It's telling you something about the model understanding something about human feelings. If you give it, in addition to the sentence, well, Betty hates Adam, so seeing him having to eat the oats makes her feel really happy. On the other hand, Jen loves Adam, so she feels somewhat sad about him having to go through this experience, right? Again, the model was trained to predict the next word in a sentence, but by doing so, by understanding human narrative, it also understands something about the underlying psychological processes that are happening. And here's one of my favorite examples of some recent research that is essentially really kind of showing how these algorithms can understand, again, used somewhat liberally, can simulate what is happening in terms of like human psychology. So this is a classic experimental setup in psychology where you have three items in a room. You have a box, you have a cat, and you have a basket. Also in the room happens to be Gustis and me, so that the two of us are in the room and we have these three items. Now what happens is Gustis takes the cat and he puts it in the basket. Then he leaves because he's busy and there's stuff to do. While Gustis is away, I pick up the cat and I move it to the box. And now I leave. Gustis comes back. And now two questions. First one, where's the cat? This is the interactive part. Where's the cat? The box, right? So I put it in the box before I left. Now the more interesting question is like, where is Gustis going to look for the cat? The basket. So this answer, again, you're like, duh, of course it's the basket. This is an answer that comes to you intuitively, it comes to you automatically and instinctively, but it's actually pretty remarkable what's lying behind this answer. And it's something that we call theory of mind. The fact that as you go through life, you actually not only simulate your own reality, you actually simulate the reality of the people around you, right? So you understand that, well, when I move the cat from the basket to the box, Gustis wasn't in the room, so he simply doesn't know. And again, for you, it's so easy and so intuitive that we oftentimes don't appreciate just how remarkable that ability is. But if I tell you that my son here, Ben, who is 16 months old, he's not going to be able to solve any of these theory of mind problems until he's around 3 to 4 years old. He won't still be able to reliably solve them until he's about 9 years old. Otherwise, extremely intelligent species like chimps, dolphins, can't solve these problems at all. And we know that it's actually a hallmark of autism, for example, that people can still reason through these problems. If they sketch it out on a piece of paper, they can still come up with the correct answer, but it doesn't come as automatically and intuitively. So it really seems to be like one of these hallmark abilities of human psychology and human behavior that we can put ourselves in the shoes of other people. Now, the fascinating part is these problems are stories, right? These problems are narrative. I told you about the cat and the basket and me and Gustis, and because they're based on language, we can actually give the same problem to these large language models and see how they do. So take a GPT, this was before ChatGPT was out in 2020, and you just give it the story, right? The same story that I told you, I give it to ChatGPT and I ask, where is the cat? So 2020, ChatGPT comes up with the answer, the cat is in the room, so far so good, it's in the basket. It doesn't even understand reality, right? It doesn't even understand the sequence of actions that the cat is now in the box because that's where I left it. So completely fails at the task. Fast forward 2 years, 2022, GPT-3 Da Vinci, give it the same task, where's the cat? The cat is in a box, so far so good. And where's Gustis going to look for the cat? In the box. Where else, right? I, as the model, know the cat is in the box. Why on earth would Gustis look anywhere else other than the box? So again, it understands reality now, but it still can't engage in the second step of like, yeah, someone else might have a different belief to what I understand and I know. Now, perhaps not surprising, you can see where this is going. ChatGPT-4, which is still, by the way, much, much smaller than the human brain in terms of the number of neurons and number of connections. You give it a task, where's the cat? Cat is in a box, yay. Where's Gustis going to look for the cat? And now this is the first time that the model actually gets it right consistently. So in this case, Gustis is most likely going to look for the cat in the basket first. So it also explains its reasoning because that's where he left it before going to work. And for me, this is really like one of the reasons for why I think LLMs are so much more than just language models, right? They're essentially extremely powerful human simulation machines. They are able to understand the world from the perspective of different people, simply because they've read so much about human narrative. And in human narratives, we talk about geography, we talk about human emotions, we talk about cultural elements. And that's something that these LLMs have simply absorbed in the way that they were built. And now coming back to this notion of what does it mean for our ability to understand human psychology based on data? What I can do with any off-the-shelf LLM, again, your ChatGPT, your Claude, your Gemini, is I can simply give it access and say, hey, here's the social media posts, here's the credit card spending, here are the Google searches of a person. Why don't you tell me if this person is more extroverted, more introverted? What are their personal values? What do you think is their potential political ideology? Are they struggling with any mental health issues? And even though those models have never been explicitly trained to make those predictions, they're extremely good at understanding the person behind the data, right? So they're essentially a way for you to democratize access to some of these predictions, even though you don't need the data yourself and you don't need to build any proprietary models. You can also obviously make this interactive with chat conversations, but it's a way in which you can tap into these existing models and learn something about the people behind the data. More so if we think about the fact that most of the time when we try to understand and predict human behavior, we do so with the intention of influencing behavior, right? If you take any offline context, most of the time when we try to understand where someone is coming from, what they might be motivated by, or what their preferences might be, we do that in a context of influence and persuasion. Any kid is really good at that, right? Any kid learns very quickly that they have to ask mom in a certain way if they want to get the candy, and then they have to ask dad in a slightly different way to optimize for success. Now, as we move to the online world, that kind of personalization got somewhat lost because it's just really difficult to do. With an LLM, again, take a ChatGPT, you can just ask it, well, just write me this short ad for an iPhone that speaks to the personality traits of openness and extroversion. Within seconds, it generates text that is not only kind of nicely tailored, but also as a consequence, much more persuasive. So we've tested this in different contexts, consumer products, political speeches. These LLMs are able to tap into the motivations and then kind of customize the content accordingly. Obviously, you can take it a step further, not just rely on text, but now also create images and video content that goes with it. And for me, that's on the one hand extremely exciting because it means that we can now use some of these insights from psychology and personality psychology specifically much more widely. But it also, as you can imagine, raises very important ethical questions that will all come back to how leaders are going to engage with these tools and use these tools. So with that, thank you so much. I recently published a book, so this is very subtle advertising here. Thank you.